Okay, if I'm correct, we are now streaming live, so let's wait until somebody can actually confirm this, because we did have some problems with connecting, but everything seems to work fine now. Yeah, okay, so let's start our episode of Digital Classroom, the workflow show. What's it all about? I'm gonna tell you later. Yeah, so today, the workflow show. So what is the workflow show and why? During the digital classrooms, you always see me shooting models, and you see me shooting sometimes, for example, a product or retouching or a seminar about street and travel photography. But one of the questions we get a lot about is like, what do you do? How do you, well, build your studio? How do you create everything to fit together nicely in a workflow? So I thought today we're going to discuss some products. We're going to discuss the whole workflow. We're going to start with the start and we're going to end with the end. So doesn't that sound right? I think so. So let's switch over to our main camera. And I'm going to switch here. Now today I'm doing everything alone. Annewiek is here, of course, but I'm mostly just controlling everything here myself. So if sometimes I have to look this way, that's because I want to switch over to camera, so it makes it easier for you guys. So one of the things that's really important during a photo shoot is, of course, to make sure that your model is at ease. That's the most important thing. So make sure that in your studio, for example, you have nice music, you have the playlist that your model actually likes, or your family, and at that point you already have a nice atmosphere. But it's also important that you as a photographer have everything under control, because if you on the set are struggling with, how do I set up my camera? How do I get in my images? That doesn't work fine, also not for your client. So today we're going to talk about some things that really help me in my workflow to create a fast workflow, but most of all a reliable workflow. We're going to talk about tethering, we're going to talk about the light meter, and of course the color checker. We're going to talk about modifications for your camera for old lenses, and of course I'm going to give you a whole rundown of what I do in Photoshop and Lightroom with some really cool plugins. But first of all, when we work in the studio, we want to make sure that if we take a picture, we immediately see that image, because if we see the image, we can interact with that image. For example, if the color isn't right, we can always fix that in Photoshop. But if a shadow isn't right, or you are a little bit off with your composition, some things you can fix in Photoshop, but if it's really bad, you can't. And on a little screen, yeah, that doesn't really work. So you have to make sure that you shoot to a big screen in your studio. And that can be an iPad, it can even be your phone, or for example, a nice big screen TV, or maybe your monitor. Now, over the years, I've tethered in many different solutions, starting with, I think, Lightroom, all the way up to Capture One. And one of the things that I always found interesting, that was, tethering works and tethering is great, but it also gives you a headache. Because sometimes it happens that, for example, your software crashes, or you're outside in the elements and it starts to rain, and you go, oh my laptop. And sometimes, and that's the frustrating part, everything goes wrong and you need to reboot, start up the software, and you don't want it. So for years I thought, like, isn't there a solution that's rock solid, that's fast, and it works? And I was always looking at my iPad, but Apple didn't release any software that was interesting for the iPad. So it was always that blown up iPhone. And a few years ago, it started happening. You could tether to your iPad, but it was only wireless. Now don't get me wrong, I love the idea of wireless. But shooting with RAW files wireless, one, it's too slow, and two, it's totally unpredictable. Now over the years, the quality has gone really up, but we still have that problem that sometimes you just don't have enough of your Wi-Fi to get a reliable connection. So we need a cable. And then I found a really cool software package on the iPad. It's called Cascable. Now, over the years, Annewiek and I always found products from smaller companies, especially companies there where we know the owners. Cascable is one of those companies. It's a little bit comparable to Annewiek and I. It's a guy with his wife doing this great software, and just look at what it can do, because this is so awesome. I'm going to switch over to my picture-in-picture, and I'm going to show you very quickly what we do with tethering. Now, the first thing you have to realize, of course, that you have to connect your camera. We're going to talk about it later. But now, at this moment, I have Cascable open in the normal mode, like I use it. So for example, if I now take a picture, let's say from the studio, it will come in immediately and it will open up a new window, as you can see here. And that's nice, of course. You see all the info in the bottom, so you always know what you have. You see your histogram. It's, in all honesty, we never use the histogram, but okay. And you will have a very nice selection of your images. And the only problem, of course, is this is on your iPad. And this was where I struggled with a lot, because now I have those images on my iPad, but how do I get them easily into Lightroom, for example? Now, when you shoot tethered, you shoot tethered for a certain reasons, right? The first one, of course, is to see the image large. A second one, without any doubt, is to make sure that you have a backup, because if your card fails or your camera, you want to make sure that those important images are stored somewhere. And this is a nice thing. In the Sony camera, and also in other brands, of course, you can set up that it saves the files on your card and on the computer. So in this case, the iPad. So that means that I already have 2 backups. But if I want to go into Lightroom, I have a problem, because most apps on the iPad work in a so-called sandbox. So that means that all the images are in the software, but it's not easily to get them out. Now, luckily, the iPad now has a file system called Files. Very creative. The cool thing about the file system is that I can now have files in a system where I can go in. And that's cool, because when I can go into that system, I can easily import those files into Lightroom. And this is where they have a really cool solution. You can use other storage, for example, at a location. And now I can choose on my iPad a folder in which I want to store those images. And in my case, I've chosen tethering. Now, in this case, there's no image there. But let's say that I'm going to shoot an image. And I'm going to take a picture. There we go. Now, when I go into my files and I go into tethering, let's see if it works. These are those moments where you really don't want to be. There we go. So of course we have to link those. I'm not going to do that now, but just for you, let's go for on my iPad, and let's go for tethering. There we go, and open. Okay, let's try something else for now. Of course we want to demonstrate this, right? So let's reconnect the camera. Let's take the picture, and now let's see if it stores it into the tethering folder, and it doesn't. So this is one of the parts where in a live stream something can happen. Normally it saves those images there, but I'm not done yet, of course. We can always pick up an image and just drag it over there. So now as you can see, it's in tethering. Oh, and as you can see now, it's already importing the other images too. So that's great. So now I can just open up Lightroom, and I can import those files straight from my device. So in this case, files. I'm sorry, not direct import. There we go. Go to files. And now, because I'm in tethering, I can just open up the file. And there we go. And now it's in Lightroom. Now, the moment I'm home or in the studio, I can just open up normal Lightroom Classic, which is synced, of course, with my Lightroom mobile. And at that point, I can really easily import all those files. Now again, normally with Cascable, if you shoot and you have a second location, it will also store those images in that second location. I don't know why it doesn't do it now. Now overall, Cascable might seem like just an app on the iPad, but there's so much more. For example, you can do some calculations. Let's say you want to use a neutral density filter for landscapes. You can do the calculation in there. You have a very nice map module. Now of course you have the part where we were in. You also have some other recipes where you can create everything. They have a nice tutorial video for that. But the thing that I want to show you is actually the live view, because also Cascable has a really nice and really fast live view, as you can see here. You can set everything up, of course. You can shoot. So for example, you can take your image, as you can see here, really nice. And you can see it all in split screen, slide over or close. So, in other words, it just integrates very, very nicely with the iPad. Okay, so let's close now Cascable for now, because I want to show you something else. And I'm going to switch over to this camera for that. So I'm going to switch over to my main camera. And I'm gonna, for now, open up my Internet Explorer. One moment. Of course, Safari in my case. And there we go. Cascable, open. There we go. Okay. And this is the part where I told you guys I have to do everything now this way. So let's go for transition. Now, normally I'm very well prepared and I can tell you everything about software that's new, especially when there's an update. And in all essence, normally with an update, you have one or two small updates, right? And that's easy to remember. Now with Photoshop, sometimes it's a lot more, or Lightroom, but most of the apps, especially on the iPad, well, if there's an update, it's easy to remember. Yeah, not with Cascable. So I want to go through it very quickly for you guys because you can also see it online, but some things that I found interesting. Now, Cascable Studio has just been released a few weeks and I've been working with it and it's very, very nice. But there is one thing that you really have to take into account. It takes a lot of work to do an update. And just look at this and remember it's a small company. So they have a new name, Cascable Studio. And that's because you can also now use Cascable, yes, on your Mac. So they have a full-blown version on the Mac and it looks exactly the same as the well-known iPad app, but now you can also use it on the Mac, which gives you a lot of extra options, of course, with integrating it into Lightroom. So Cascable is now also on the Mac, and that's why they now call it Cascable Studio, of course. You can now do a video recording, and that is nice. That's on Canon, Sony, and Nikon cameras. And you can also copy, of course, everything from the internal storage to your Cascable. We have a lot of hardware remote control improvement, including hardware accelerated live view. This is important. Sometimes you see the live views and it just stutters. And we don't do a lot of video with this kinds of setup, but if you do video, it's really nice that they now have a very nice, smooth video. You have a live LUT preview, meaning if you want to give a look to an image, you can now literally do that. Metal FX upscaling, for the freaks. Negative mode, so Cascable Studio automation tools. Great solution for digitizing and negatives. Now, some people use their cameras, of course, to digitize slides or negatives. And it's really nice to immediately see in your software, of course, what you're gonna get. And with negatives, it's always, you look at it and go, oh, nice. But then when you can flip it and show it, it just gives you a totally different option. We have onion skinning now for stop motion photographers. Something I know absolutely nothing about. And you can use picture in picture. This is something that a lot of people wanted. It's something that I sometimes use when I'm using, for example, in a class, Lightroom and Cascable next to each other. It's nice that they have it now, picture in picture. And of course, a better integration with photos. Now, I personally am a big Adobe fan. So in my workflow, I use Adobe Lightroom. But if you use Photos, Cascable is now fully compatible with Photos. So it just dumps everything into Photos, so you don't have to think about anything anymore. You just shoot on location, you come home, and everything is done for you guys. Now we have Retro Beds and Capture One. So the integration, you can also couple it to Capture One. And it's something I really advise you guys to look online, because this is a big thing that you can now link certain software and with Cascable. It's nice. Again, it's something that I personally don't use a lot because I'm totally into that Lightroom area, but I hear from a lot of people this is cool. Now the tethering improvements, this is nice. Normally Cascable was always for safety, so they first save the image on the card and then to the computer. Now you have options where you can say like, okay, I want faster tethering, so I don't want to save it on the card anymore, just put it straight into the computer. In all honesty, it's something that I wouldn't do. I like the backup on my card and on the computer, and when I'm doing a really important assignment, I actually also have an external hard drive connected to my iPad or to the computer. Now, small improvements like rate photos and videos directly on Canon cameras, that's also nice, of course, but I'm shooting Sony, so. And we have some recipe additions. Now, recipes is something that I personally don't use, but I hear from a lot of people that especially for video, they have some really cool recipes at the moment. Now, it's a big update and it's, I believe, only 34 euros if you already have the Cascable normal on your iPad. So I think it's great. It's a smaller company, support the smaller companies because, well, just as all the bigger companies, they have to earn a living, right? And Cascable really deserves your attention. Okay, so that was for tethering on the software side. We're going to talk now a little bit about the hardware side. So I'm going to switch back to my camera. So let's go for a main camera. Yes, there we go. Okay, so software side, Cascable. Let me see, does this work? Yes. software side, Cascable, but hardware side. Now, to make sure that you can tether correctly, I already talked about shooting wireless. Now, wireless, again, is not a perfect solution. If you want to make sure that your images come in, it's very wise to use a wire. And in most cases nowadays, people use USB-C. And for us, this is a really big gift because USB-C is much better for tethering. When you look at those smaller connections, they are really fragile and sometimes they just doesn't sit in nicely. Annewiek, what's wrong?
Je staat niet groot, je bent klein.
I am small? Oh, okay, yeah. I have my wrong camera in there. So I'm going to switch over very quickly. There we go. That's better, I think. So now people can actually see me better. I don't know if that's a gift, but hey. So you want to make sure that you have a cable in your camera that's securely locked. USB-C is already a much better connection, but still you can damage your cable for the very simple reason. If you walk around, you hold your camera like this, there's a lot of tension on the cable. Now, over the years, there have been many solutions to actually prevent your cable from damaging your port. One of the solutions that I used a lot was actually gaffer's tape or duct tape. Yes, you heard it correctly. We just taped the cable to your camera. In all honesty, it wasn't a perfect solution. It became really fast, dirty. Your camera didn't survive a few tapes and you had to clean it again. It was terrible. Then there were solutions where you literally had your cable hanging around your camera with a little bit of a tension release. Not perfect. You want to make sure that it fits and it fits nicely. Now, over the years, we've tried many solutions and I ended up with, in my opinion, the perfect solution. Now, you saw how quickly those images came in. What I'm using is a 15-meter IQ wire cable. The nice thing about IQ wire is they have longer cables, but most of all, the cables have boosters in a line. So that means that you don't have to use extension cables. You can just order 5, 10 or 15-meter cables. And that's a big plus because if you don't have extension cables, it means they can't get loose. One more thing not to worry about. Another thing that I really like, and I'm going to go for a more close-up for this. So let's see if we got the right one. Yep. So let me show you this very quickly. It's an angled connector. And the angled connector is very important because as you can see on my camera, it makes sure that everything is nice and neat. So you don't have anything sticking out. Another thing that you can see on my camera is actually that we have a defense system mounted on the camera. So let me turn the camera around. This is the part that will actually protect everything from hitting my camera from this side. So the port is protected. The other side is protected by the little port that's already on your camera. And what we did is we made the connector slightly smaller so it fits nicely in between. So here, if I click it in, you can see that it's really flush. That's why we have this little piece of tape. So I can literally just take the connector out. Now, of course, you want to make sure that everything sits nice and tightly on your camera. So that's why we have the defense system on the bottom part also. And now, with me, I walk around a lot during trade shows and I want to make sure that I can quickly change my cameras around. And with tethering, I want to make sure that it always fits like this. So that's why we use a so-called braking system. Because it's also very important that if you break your cable or if you stand on your cable, you don't yank the camera out of your hands or you don't destroy the cable itself. So this is why we also have this. Now watch this. There we go. So if somebody stands on my cable, this will drop on the floor and this one will keep hanging on my camera. So there's no problem at all. And if I want to switch really fast, if I go, for example, to another location and I have a 5-meter cable, I can just connect this one again and start tethering. And you might wonder, okay, but what's that big thing underneath your camera? That's the slider. If I press here, I can just take the slider out. Of course, I'm used to doing it like this. You can just take the slider out. And now I can very easily use different cameras with just the same system. So let me see, let me turn towards the camera. You click it in and that's it. Very, very handy system and very, very safe. Okay, let's switch back to my main camera. Okay, so for tethering, this is one of the things I highly recommend. It's super safe, it's fast, and I've been using the cables now for over 2 years. And I didn't have any defective cable yet. And in the past that was slightly different. Some cables are very, very good. Some cables destroy very easily. And most of the times when you just drag them over the floor all the time, they will damage. And especially with connectors in the middle, it wasn't the perfect solution. This works like a charm. And first, the cables were actually red. You might remember that. Red cables from IQ Wire. Now, because a lot of people ask like, hey, we want black cables because of reflections. Now we have carbon black cables. Again, available in 5, 10 and 15 meters. Now, when we start tethering, we also want to make sure, of course, that our lighting is correct and our colors are correct. And that's why we use another tool. And this is called the light meter. And let me switch over for a top view. We have all the luxury today. The light meter is very, very simple. You just turn it on. You hold it in front of the area you want correctly lit. You fire the strobe and you're done. Now, let me switch over to this camera so you can see it better. Now, a lot of people are stressing about light meters and they go like, yeah, but they're really hard to read. No, they're not. As you can see here, we have ISO 200 on a shutter speed of 250, and you can exactly see everything else in the light meter. So it's not that hard to do. Now, of course, if you go like, hey, but I don't want to shoot on ISO 200, I want to shoot on ISO 100, and you go like, okay, so on a shutter speed of 125th, it's 5.63 at ISO 200. And let's say you don't know anything about photography and you just want to go to 5.6. Now, in all honesty, it isn't that hard. 5.63 is one click away from 5.6. But let's say you want to go to 5.6. Just look at your light meter, go for ISO, and just go down one click. And as you can see here, now it's 5.60. So now you just look at your light meter and you go like, okay, I want to shoot at 5.60. Now I need ISO 160. It's very simple. Now let's say that you want to shoot on f8. You just go up, up, up. Ah, there we go. ISO 320. So the light meter already calculates everything for you. Now, of course, the idea is that you calculate and not let the light meter do all the work. But overall, a very simple tool. You hold it in front of the area you want correctly lit. You fire the strobes. And you get your light meter reading, you dial it in your camera, and you have your perfect exposure. So you don't need to do anything in Photoshop. Now, of course, when you have perfect exposure, you also want perfect colors. And one of the biggest frustrations which I experienced when I was starting out with photography is that every time that I did a photo shoot, I struggled to get the colors right. Now, at one point, the colors were right, and I was like, yes, great. And then I started using presets in Lightroom. And I loved presets because every time I wanted something to look a certain way, I just opened up a preset and it looked that way. I was going like, that's awesome, this is great. The only problem was I didn't trust presets, and for the very simple reason, what worked on Saturday didn't work on Friday and didn't work on Thursday. And I was just wondering like, how is this possible? It came close, but no cigar. And then I started thinking like, hey, you know what? My profession is actually an ISF calibrator and photographer, of course, but we also do stuff with home theater. And with calibrations, we always look at color space, at CMS, color management system, and we look at our grayscale. And the grayscale is the balance between red, green and blue, and it makes sure that colors look neutral. Now, in the digital system, we agreed that neutral means RGB is equal. And that's easy because when you look at Photoshop, you can actually see RGB. And I was just thinking at that point, how can I make sure that everything that I shoot, I can easily create into, and it just hit me, a gray card, a neutral gray card. And luckily for me, those were available at that moment in time. Do remember that when I found this out for myself, we didn't have a lot of gray card manufacturers. We had Greytag Macbeth with those big color checkers, and they were really expensive. But the normal gray balance cards, yeah, you could buy them, but not like today. Today, everything is automated. Today, you just shoot one simple tool, you go into Lightroom, you create your profile, you make your color balance, and I kid you not, after that, every single preset you run will look exactly the same if you shoot it on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Saturday, even on Sunday. And what's the tool? The Color Checker Passport from Calibrite. Now, this is a vital part in my workflow. Now, I normally use this site. This site is white balance and, of course, to create your profile. But when we do a video commercially, so not the vlogs we intentionally film really simple with handheld devices. But when we do commercial videos, we use this part. This part is for color, black, medium, and wides. So you can really easily set it up. Now, Calibrite has two different kinds of color checkers. They have this one, the duo, and they have the single one. If you're just a photographer, get the single one. It saves you a lot of money. But if you're also doing video, get the duo one. It saves you a lot of money because you only have to buy one. And as Dutch people, that's really cool. Now, there's one thing that you have to realize from a color checker. It's just as accurate as the color checker is. Meaning, if you are shooting outside in UV lighting and you just leave your color checker open all day, you can count on it to be totally damaged by the end of the day. If you leave it in the rain, it will be totally damaged by the end of the day. If you have your model with makeup and she touches the patches, yeah, it won't work anymore. So be careful with your color checker. There's a reason you can close them up. So the moment you take the shot, you hold it in front of the area that's the nicest lit and that you know exactly how it's perfectly exposed, and you hold it like this. Don't touch the squares, just hold it, shoot it as flat as possible, make sure you don't have any accent lightings on, no colored lights, just the color checker, and then it will work great into Lightroom. Okay, so we've done this. And of course, sometimes you also just want to have fun, right? And did it ever happen to you guys that you are out of creative moods? That you go like, I don't know what to do. I have a lot of ideas, but I just don't feel like it. And you know that sometimes when you get certain gear, it just works nicer, it works fine, and you go like, oh, this inspires me. I have that with guitars. For example, if I play over a tube amp, I just play much better. If I use a certain vintage guitar, for example, a Gem from Steve Vai, I'm a huge Steve Vai fan. Somehow when I play that guitar, I just play faster, I just play better. I play a little bit like little Stevie Vai when he was 8. But when I pick up a Strat, that's the Jimi Hendrix part, of course, you just play differently. So how would this work? Nowadays we have these cameras with great lenses, right? I'm a Sony ambassador, so I have this great Sony 24-70 2.8 G Master. This is an awesome lens. I think this is one of the best lenses they ever made. For me, it works like a charm. But it's also perfect. It's so perfect that when I want to shoot, for example, those nice lens flares, I'm using a magnetic system from K&F Concept, the Black Mist, also part of my workflow. So I don't want to fake it in Photoshop, I want to create it. Why fake it when you can create it, right? And with a magnetic system and, for example, a black diffusion filter, you can create those beautiful lens flares. And the nice thing is, if you don't have backlighting, it smoothens the skin just a little bit. You don't see it in the shot as softer, but it just glows a little bit nicer. I really like that. But those lenses are perfect. And for us, lenses are our eye to the world, right? So why not use vintage lenses? Like, for example, this one. Now, let me do a sidestep. If you still have old A-mount lenses for your E-mount Sony, you can of course get an LIA5. Now the LIA5 is a really great converter. You can create very simple a step down from your A-mount to your E-mount. And it works like a charm. Just make sure with the A7R5 you get the version 5. We had some lenses that didn't work and that did work on the A7R4. So the 5 works great. Now in this case I'm using a Sigma 12-24. I just love that lens, but it's for me not available on the E-mount, this one. So I'm still using this one. But that's modern glass. This is much more fun. This is old glass. And you probably know the names, Zeiss, Jena, maybe you have some Paragon lenses. And then you already know that, for example, the Paragon lenses, those aren't really good. But when you have a Zeiss or Jena, those are literally size lenses, but old lenses. And the cool thing about old lenses is you don't need any filters for lens flare. If they see backlighting, they go like, whoa, backlighting, and they start to flare. You don't need to put any vignetting around in Lightroom because the lenses already have vignetting. You don't need to make the sides a little bit softer because, well, the lenses are crap, so they already do it. But what you do get is this beautiful vintage look in your images. Now, in all honesty, if you show me two images, one shot with a modern glass and one with the vintage lens, can I pick them apart? I probably don't. I don't know, because we do a lot of stuff with tinting later on in Photoshop. But I do know one thing. When I shoot with a lens like this, I shoot differently. I feel differently because you have to work for it. And I think that's the biggest part to get vintage lenses on your camera. They slow you down. The focus is slower. You have to make sure that everything fits nicely together. And then you get this little bit of grayish in your image, a little bit of yellow look, maybe some softness. They have character, let me put it this way. The normal lenses nowadays, they are perfect, but they don't have that character. And this, oh man, this is character. Now, you might wonder like, okay, Frank, great, I want to have a lens like this. What should I look for? Zebras. This is not a real zebra, but it looks a little bit like it. The zebras normally have these stripes here in silver. Those are really great. And the nice thing is, you can buy them on flea markets for €5, €10. People almost give them away. But how do you mount them on your camera? There are a few solutions. If you don't use a Sony camera, just use a step-down converter from M42 to your mount. In my case, Sony mount A, so we go from M42 to a Sony A mount. But then you have to do everything manually. And don't get me wrong, I love manual focus, but sometimes I don't want to use manual focus. I love autofocus. So how do I get lenses like this to work as an autofocus lens? This is cool. Now, there is a converter on the market from PhotoDiox and TechArt. Now, I'm still using the older one, and I would love to test out a new one to see what the difference is, but this is the older one. Now, the PhotoDiox adapter makes it possible to mount Leica M glass on your Sony camera and make it autofocus. Now, how does it work? It very simply just moves the lens forward and backward, same as an old bellows focus. So it autofocuses. An added benefit is if you're smart and you pre-focus a lot, you can create a macro lens. So a lot of those old lenses, they can focus to 1 meter distance. But sometimes you want 50 centimeters and that doesn't work, right? Well, if you pre-focus with a system like this, you get a macro. You can go up to 1 centimeter if you want. Of course, infinity is totally messed up, but hey, that's the cool part. You can use your own focus and you can use, of course, the converter. So how do I get an M42? Because it's Leica M. The nice thing is it's all about flange distance. So the flange distance from a Leica M is shorter than from an M42. So in other words, if you get the TechArt module with Leica M, you just use the same converters from K&F Concept, for example, only now you use them from M42 to Leica M. They're the same price. So if you just want to use it on your camera, you go from M42 to your camera mount. If you use a converter like this, you go from M42 to Leica mount. And I highly recommend it. It's just plain awesome. Okay, so after the break, we're going to talk about strobes and what kinds of strobes to buy for your own studio. And we're going to do a Lightroom and Photoshop tips and tricks. So we'll be right back after these messages because, well, we also have to do that, of course. So Okay, that was BenQ. Now, BenQ has been with us for many, many years, and during Digital Classroom, it's of course difficult to show you the monitors because we use the monitors, and the Digital Classroom is of course done somewhere where I don't retouch. But I'm using the BenQ monitors now for many years, and one of the reasons I choose BenQ is because they get it. And that sounds weird, but as I mentioned before, Annewiek and I also run a company that does home theater. And for the home theater, I do calibrations for the Imaging Science Foundation. And one of the things that I always found interesting is when you buy a monitor with, for example, a built-in analyzer, you always get these stories like, hey, but it's calculated and don't worry about it. And in 10 years, it will still be reliable. And as a professional calibrator, that doesn't work. First of all, the metering is wrong. You have to make sure that you meter in the center or the sides from your screen. If you want to do it right, you actually have to meter on different parts of that screen to make sure that your colors are right. Thank you so very much. And that's one of the things that I have with just analyzers coming down in the middle, in the center. Another thing is that when you use a 3-stimulus meter and you use glass, still there is a period of time where that will deteriorate, so you need a new analyzer. For professional work, we actually make sure that we have new analyzers every 2 or 3 years. And for computer work, which is very critical, you have to make sure that you calibrate your monitor with a proper calibrator. So not one that's 5 years old. So if you go on eBay or whatever and you buy a color analyzer, don't. Because those color analyzers are old and probably not very reliable anymore. So what kind of color analyzer should you buy if you don't use a BenQ monitor or if you use a BenQ monitor? Now, and I already showed you before, I'm a big fan of the Calibrite brand, and this is one of the analyzers that I highly recommend. It's a Display Plus HL. And if you are just starting out, this one is awesome. It's the 1, 2, 3. I have to say it correctly, and this is the box. The Display 1, 2, 3. Now the Display 1, 2, 3 is really simple, really nice, and you just install the software and everybody can do it. I gave it to Annewiek and I said, you can't read the manual, calibrate. 10 minutes later she called me, yeah, it's done. And maybe 20 minutes, whatever, but it was really, really easy to do. Now, when you use the modern laptops, like for example the new MacBooks, you do have to make sure that the new screens have a high output. So when you buy an analyzer, don't buy one that doesn't support the high outputs. So make sure you have the HL for high luminance, I always say. So those can manage those higher outputs. Because with HDR, you get a lot of light from your screen. If you have an analyzer that doesn't support that light output, the calibration will not be correct. Because during the calibration, you will see different squares. And those squares are so-called sweeps. So for example, they start out with really dark red and they go all the way up to the brightest red possible. Now let's say that your old screen has this in dynamic range and your analyzer has this. You have no problem at all. It can just read all the values and do a proper calibration. Now the new screens, they have this in dynamic range and your analyzer only does this. The problem now comes, it sweeps up the red, it can still go higher, but your analyzer stops here. So you get a really crushed calibration, which doesn't work, and it just shows you a terrible representation of your work. With a high luminance meter, your dynamic range of your monitor is this, your dynamic range of your analyzer is this. So there's no problem at all, it just fits in between. Those are a little bit more expensive, but it's very simple. You don't put diesel in a gas car, right? So you don't calibrate a high resolution, a high luminance screen with a normal analyzer. You need a different analyzer for that. Calibrite didn't think of that. It's just reality. It's about sensitivity. So make sure you do that right. So why the BenQ monitors? Over the years, one of the things I found interesting about BenQ is they don't do anything with built-in analyzers. They don't do anything with built-in this or that. They literally say an analyzer has to be replaced after a few years. So we write software and it's called Palette Master. Palette Master you run on your Mac, on your PC, and it calibrates the monitor inside. We call that hardware calibration. Now the main advantage of hardware calibration is that you get a better representation of your work. You have more steps. It's easier to calibrate for the monitor, of course, because it is the monitor. Another thing that I like about the BenQ monitors is of course also their paper-like screens. One of the biggest frustrations with my MacBook, for example, is if I'm outside, I can't do anything. A few months ago, a few years ago actually, we were on the boat to England and I tried to retouch. and it was terrible. I couldn't retouch because there were lights in the boat, and if I sit on the other side, there was light hitting the screen. So I ended up just reading something or just doing some fun stuff while I could be working. The new MacBook Pros have that really nice anti-gloss screen. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's worth every single cent. And that's the same technique you also see in those BenQ screens. So no high reflection screens, they have this really nice paper-like quality in their screens. Now you might wonder, paper-like, that has nothing to do with the screen, right? It's something with printers. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Paper-like was actually designed to make sure that you get a proper print from your monitor. Because there's one thing a lot of people don't realize. There's a huge difference between what you see on your monitor and what you will see in print. Now think about it. A monitor emits light, RGB. But when you use a printer, you don't emit light, you actually absorb light. And you use the colors cyan, magenta, yellow and key. Or in some cases, of course, in all cases by the way, black. And sometimes, that's what I wanted to say, you also find red, green, blue in your printers. But normally you use cyan, magenta and yellow and black for your key. So that means we have different colors to create the same colors as we have with RGB. So you probably already guessed that emitting light, absorbing light, using different colors, you will never get it 100% right. Now when you do really critical work, it's important to take one little extra step in that emulation. And that's what Paperlike does. You type in your printer, you make sure that everything is set up correctly, and then when you run the emulation, you can get a really good perception of how it's going to look on print. Now, when you print, also make sure that when your client displays the prints, it has to be under correct lighting. You don't want to know how often it happens that a client calls us like, hey, we have this print, it looks like crap. And you go like, okay, go outside, turn over the print. Because in the past, we bought those stickers from Great Hack Macbeth. I don't know if you know those stickers, but you can put them on the back of your print. And when the client goes outside and it turns the picture around, it should be a square. Now, if they go inside and the color is wrong, you will see two squares next to each other. It colors it differently. On the perfect lighting, you will immediately see, wow, this is perfect lighting. It's a very easy tool, and I highly recommend, if you use print, to actually put those prints on the back, or sorry, those stickers on the back, so when your client calls, or you can use it for your client as education, look at the back. If you see two, it's not right. If you see one, then you have proper lighting. Really easy tool, and it works great. Okay, now of course, when you start your studio, you want to make sure that everything works. Because now we talked about the monitors, hardware calibration, we talked about using a light meter, color checker, so colors are right. We have tethering set up, everything is cool, but we didn't talk about lighting yet. Now, when you have followed my work for many years, you know that I've used some brands in strobes. When I started out with a very cheap brand called Jin Bei. There's nothing wrong with the brand, it was great. Very soon I switched over to Ellingrom, and I've used Ellingrom for many, many years, and I absolutely love the guys over there, and I absolutely love their products. If you are starting with photography and you want to buy good strobes, get Ellingrom strobes, they're awesome. But also Hensel, and Hensel are also great strobes. They're a little bit more expensive than the Ellingroms, a little bit more high-end. Everything is just a little bit better. So also highly recommend Hensel. And then something happened. Hensel stopped with their ambassadors program, and I was already using strobes to replace my speedlights, and they were called Giotto strobes. And I really loved them. And I decided, you know what, let's start out with just testing out these Giotto strobes in our studio. It took me a few weeks, and then I actually contacted Giotto if they had any representation in Europe, and they didn't. So we decided to pick up the brand, and I'm going to show you exactly why. So normally when we travel, we want to make sure that on location we want to have a lot of light. Now with older systems, you don't have HSS. Now HSS means that you have a high shutter speed, or high speed sync, sorry. So you can use a higher shutter speed when using strobes. When you use normal strobes, you are stuck with the X-sync, and that's 125th of a second in most cases. And that means if you shoot higher, you get that nasty black bar in your screen. If you use a system that uses HSS, high speed sync, you can shoot up to 1/8000th of a second. The only problem is you get a lot less light output. But that doesn't matter, Because the reason we do it, we want to shoot wide open, right? 2.8, kill the sun, and have that beautiful depth of field. So our new strobes, the Giottos, they run on batteries. So in the studio, I don't need any cables anymore. They run for about 400 to 500 shots on one battery, so that's more than enough on full power. And I can take them very easily with me on the road or on location in my backpack. So let me start out by showing you the first one, and that's the GT200. And that's the rectangular one. Yep. This is our new intern. This is the round one, the other one. There we go, thank you. Okay, so we have two different ones that are smaller ones. These are, those are a little bit, I think, based on speed lights, but they are much more powerful. This one is, this is the GT200. It's 200 watts output, but there's a thing, and this is why I do it in the workflow episode. You have to look at the front of your strobes to see what's going on. Now, this is the 250, this is the 200. Do you believe when I tell you that this one gives you a lot more light output than this one? You probably don't, because this is 200, this is 250. So what's going on? When you look at the front of a strobe, you can see that this one uses a so-called Fresnel lens. A Fresnel lens will give you a harsher quality of light, but more light output. If we look at this one, it's a round glass with a normal flash tube. This is great, it still gives you 250 watts, but it doesn't give you that harsh quality of light that a Fresnel gives. This is more softer, this is nicer for portraits. Now you might wonder, okay Frank, so in the studio you use a lot of this, why do you use this one? And I'm gonna say something that will totally surprise you. In the studio I hardly use this one, I always use this one. Because, and this is what you have to realize, in the studio we use modifiers, we use softboxes, we use beauty dishes. So as soon as I place something in front of it, that big advantage of that softer light becomes much less irrelevant than the light output. I want light output, and then the 200 just wins hands down. If you use it bare, I would highly recommend getting something with a normal flash tube. But if you use it like us with modifications and light shapers, get something like this with a lot of light output. So this is perfect, right? Yeah, it's nice, you know, we have this pistol grip where you don't need the boom arm, so you can literally just point your strobe in any location you want. We have this smart that you can put it on your stand, but you can also take it out and put it inside here, so you don't lose it. And of course, when you press the plus and the minus buttons at the same time, it's also compatible with Godox controllers, so you can integrate it into your Godox system. Is there a disadvantage? Yeah, big one, the modeling lights. Now, when you use in the studio lighting, you want to make sure that you see what you're doing. Now, of course, you can put on the studio lights and then you just shoot. It's no problem at all. Probably the strobes will have way more power than your available light, so it will just kill the available light. But you don't see all the nice shadows. It's much nicer to have modeling lights. Now, for the GT200 and the 250, if you use them with hard modifiers, like for example, let's say a beauty dish or a reflector, they will have a very, very nice light output. But when you use softboxes, they can be a little bit on the lower side. And that's why we also have another one. And that's the one I'm using mostly in the studio. So can you give me the 400, please? Now these can fit in your backpack really easily. This one too, but a little bit less easily. This is the backpack I will let Annewiek carry, for example. I'm sorry. This one is a little bit more heavy. This is a 400 watt. And this one emits a lot of light, but the main advantage is the modeling light is much stronger. So the Elingrom and Hensel still had a stronger modeling light, but for what it does, it works great with modern cameras. Especially when you have a wide open lens, like for example a 2.8 lens in the studio, this is more than enough. I do have to be honest, with these I always use my modeling lights on 100%, and then the battery lasts for about 3 to 4 hours, and that's more than enough. I just change over the battery in the break and we're done for a full workshop shooting. So they just run on forever. A really cool system, really nice. Okay, so we talked about the strobes. So what should you buy for your studio? I would highly recommend getting, for example, one main light with a very strong modeling light, and then, for example, two 200s as your accent lights, where the modeling lights are still important, but not main important. And that way you have a system that you can use in your studio with 3 strobes, and you can always go on location with 2 portable strobes, so you don't need 2 separate sets. And that was one of the problems that we had in the past with both Hensel and Ellingrom, and nowadays that's changed, of course. We had one set for location with a battery pack and a huge strobe, and we had one set for in the studio. Nowadays you don't need that anymore. You just pick up your strobes and you go on location and it just works fine. Now of course we also want to do some modification on our lighting. And for our modification I'm using the Rogue magnetic system. So you can just click everything on, like for example these are gels. We have an omnidirectional dome which you can fit on, and my personal favorite, our snoot, which you can put in for different locations. So you can put it like this. If you want more focus light, you do this, more focus light, and you do this. And if you're really creative, you can also do it like this, which doesn't make any sense at all, but it's still cool. Now, the nice thing about the snoot, if I place it on a round strobe, I get a really nice round effect. Now, when you look in the box, and this is what sets it apart from other manufacturers will build in like a diffusion panel, because they know if I put it on a rectangular strobe, it doesn't project a round image, it will project something that's rectangular. And I just love that, because we still have in the box, we have a diffusion panel, so you can still put it in front, but what if you use it on a rectangular strobe? Now you can really have a nice effect on your model with just one line of light. And I've used that a lot. It's not a really narrow line of light, but you can still see it mimics a little bit like a strip light. Absolutely love this one. Okay, so we talked about strobes, we talked about tethering, about cameras. I think we did everything except for one thing that I still want to point out. This is one device that I designed myself. Well, I changed the design. Let me change to our camera that shows me the top. I think that's best. Where is it? There. Okay, so this is our CableBlock. You can buy it in our web store for 35 euros. And this is a release for the tension on your cable. So the same thing that we have from IQ Wire. So this one, and this one is absolutely perfect and much better, of course. But if you don't have the budget for that, this is a really nice solution. We painted it red, of course. Now, normally you would need a screwdriver or a coin to make them go away from your camera. We have this little handle, and now you can just do it yourself, much easier. Also, we got some questions about people that don't use an Arca mount. Hey, can I still use it on my Arca mount? Yes, you can. We drilled 2 extra holes here, so now you can also use it on systems that don't have an Arca mount. You can just mount it extra here. We made this flush, so perfect. When you turn it around, we have these nice rubber stamps here, so you don't damage your camera. 2 guides, in other words, one for a thinner cable, one for a thicker cable. And one of the things that we changed is we made them smaller. So a lot of these where you buy them, they're a little bit bigger, and it means that if you put them under your camera, you can't open up your battery compartment anymore. And with this one, you don't have that problem. So it's smaller, it's easier, and it just works. Okay, let's switch over to the next part. And the next part is going to be a little bit terrifying, because in the next part, it could be that I lose connection with the internet. Now, we tested this out before. Sorry, I have to pick something up. We tested this out before and it did work. So I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be working now. But it's now time for our workflow in the computer. So let's start everything up, and I will be right back with you guys. So let's do something cool for now. Switch over to my desktop now, and this is what freaks me out, because now we're gonna do a lot of heavy lifting on our CPU. And this is an M4 Pro, so in essence it should be no problem at all. Now, some people said the audio is quiet. The audio is over here is great. It could be that we have the monetization on the live stream, so that's the commercials from YouTube probably that are a lot louder. There was a question about the light meter, by the way. Do you point towards the lens or towards the light? Hold it in front of the area you want correctly lit. Don't make any mistakes with that by learning it the wrong way. Now, in all honesty, when I started out, I always said, okay, point it towards the light source because that's best. And then I started realizing, like, hey, wait a minute. If I'm outside and I'm in the sun and my model is backlit, should I point it towards the light source? That's weird. And actually, one of the videos from Dean Collins, I don't know if you know him, but if you don't, check him out because he's absolutely awesome. One of the videos from Dean Collins actually got me into really understanding the light meter. It isn't about aiming it towards something, it's holding it in front of something. And if you remember that one, it will be so easy to use, because if you hold it in front of the area you want correctly lit, right? That's the face of the model, for example. In the studio, that always means that you point towards the light source, because the light source is there to lit that part correctly, so you aim towards the light source. You hold it in front of the area you want correctly lit. But now as soon as you go outside, you don't have to remember, oh, now outside I don't... No, you hold it in front of the area you want to light correctly. So, with backlighting model, hold it in front of the face of the model. Now you get this beautiful backlit model and the face is correctly lit. And this is one of the biggest things for me in understanding the light meter, because before that part I always struggled with the light meter. Like, okay, so where do I point the bloody thing? What do I do with it? Why does it work? And it just didn't click until I saw Dean Collins explaining it so incredibly simple. Hold it in front of the area when correctly lit, because it's an incident meter. It's not a reflective meter, it's incident. And go like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Also, one thing I want to point out, there are certain older books that talk about somebody with a darker skin, that you have to overexpose. Don't. Never overexpose. If your light meter tells you 5.6, shoot it on 5.6. If you have somebody with a really dark skin, what you can do is just use different backlighting. If you make sure that the background is just a little bit brighter, they will stand out much nicer. For example, if you're shooting against a black backdrop. So make sure that you never overexpose, unless it's part of that look, right? Sometimes you just want to overexpose half a stop or make it more moody by underexposing. But your light meter will always give you the perfect exposure. Yeah. Okay, so I'm now in Lightroom. I selected 3 images just for fun. And I want to show you something that you can easily do. Now, as you can see here, I didn't change anything to most of the images. This one I gave some shadow extra, but that's not really necessary. But I need it for something I'm going to do in retouching. This one, same thing, because I need it in retouching, and this one also same. Now, those images were shot perfectly, but sometimes I open up the shadows for one simple reason. I know what I'm going to do in Photoshop. I know that that filter is going to block up my shadows a little bit, so I'm opening up the shadows in Lightroom to make sure that when I run the filter, my shadows still look the same as I shot it. People could say like, hey, why didn't you shoot it with the shadows more open? And that will give me a different look in my images. And sometimes I determine the look when I'm behind my computer and I don't know if I'm going to use that look. So I'm going to shoot it perfect. And then in Lightroom, I still have enough latitude with my shadows and highlight sliders to create something fitting for my preset. Okay, let's go into Photoshop. Command E, of course, but I already loaded the images. Now, when we look at an image like this, there's nothing wrong with the image. It looks absolutely great, right? Nice model. But when we go for 100%, there's something that you might notice. And that's, of course, here's some little blemishes over here. Is that bad? No, if you don't have any blemishes, good for you, but most people do. And especially nowadays with digital cameras, they are relentless. They show you everything, every little blemish they show you. So I need something for this. Now, in the past, we did everything manually. Of course, after doing it manually, there were filters. And one of the filters I used for many, many years is image normal portraiture. Great filter. It's expensive, but it's absolutely awesome. And I still have it on my computer for the very simple reason, if I need something like a sledgehammer, that's without any doubt image normal portraiture. That's my sledgehammer. If a model is really bad in her skin and, for example, the legs are totally with, how do you call that, chicken, you know what I mean, right? All those little parts because it's cold. That's where image normal portraiture still saves today. Before, everything manual, then image normal. And then Skylum came out with, for example, Luminar, Luminar AI, and of course Luminar Neo. Now, Luminar Neo has a great filter for skin. It works great, but it's limited. Now, of course, we also have Photoshop with the neural filters. The problem with Photoshop is that the neural filters focuses on the face. And, of course, a model has way more than a face, so we want to do a full body. Now, a while ago, Skylum released the so-called Aperty, a new plugin, and you can use it as a standalone or in Photoshop or Lightroom. And it promised it the perfect skin retouching. Now, the previous time I showed you this, I told you guys that I'm not using it at the moment because it only did the face. It didn't do any body skin. I literally kid you not. The moment we pressed stop for the live stream, I went home, I looked in my email, new release of Aperty, including body. So a week later, the official release was there, and now we also have body. So now I want to show you that again. Aperty, without any doubt, is a plugin I highly recommend. So let's go for Aperty. And I have to be honest, when I'm streaming, sometimes the blemishes don't work the way that I want to. And as you saw with Cascable, everything works fine, of course, unless you're in a live stream. But hey, that's the cool part about live streams. Now, you might say, hey, Frank, this looks a little bit like Lightroom, or a little bit like Capture One, or a little bit like, yeah, they all look a little bit the same, right? And it isn't just skin. That's the cool thing. Now, if you have Luminar, Neo, or AI, I don't know if I would upgrade. But if you don't have any of those, without any doubt, get Aperty if you are into fashion photography or models or whatever. Let's just go through them very simple. The essentials is develop, of course, your exposure, your contrast, your highlights. And as you can see here, it just works the same way that you are used to in Lightroom and Photoshop. You have your curves, you have your color, and you have your hue, saturation, and luminance, or in other words, your color mixer, of course. We have a really nice black and white option. We have sharpen, details, and the details you probably know, small, large, and you have structure. In other words, you can do whatever you want, and you have noise reduction. Great, awesome. Of course, you can crop. Not interested at that at this point. You can change everything, and now it's getting interesting. Let's start with the face. So let's zoom in on the face. And the first thing I want to do is blemish removal. So let's turn that on 100% because I know that YouTube destroys a lot of the information. As you can see here, that saves you a lot of work. It's not perfect, but man, it comes close. Now, of course, we also want to make sure that we have nice, proper skin smoothing. Also, for YouTube, let's put it on 100%. There we go, look at this. Now, if you want to see the difference, very simple. Just drag your slider up and down. Look at that, wow. But also look at the hairs. It does affect some of the hairs, but it still looks very, very natural. And it doesn't affect anything in the eyebrows and also not in the eyes. Perfect selection. Look at that. This is awesome. Yep, great. Now, of course, we want to do more, right? We want to make sure that we also have some face skin correction. So the color correction. So we can also do this. As you can see here, it takes out some infections. If you have dark circles under your eyes, well, she did get a good night's sleep, so she doesn't have anything. You can do face brighten. For example, if you underexposed slightly. You can do shine removal. Very, very handy. Look at that. For me, it takes out a little bit of the three-dimensionality, so most of the time I don't use it. With eyes, I can't do anything now, but I will show you that later. We have the mouth, makeup, and body skin. And body skin is awesome. Okay, so let's apply this. And then I want to show you something else, and that's way cooler. But I first wanted to show you the skin. And processing takes a long time at the moment, I think because we're also streaming. There we go. Nice. Okay, so let's close this image. I could have done cancel. This one, highlighting, high contrast, much worse. Let's see how we can do this. So let's go into Skylum, let's go into Aperty. And in this case, it's much more hard lighting. So the other one was pretty soft. This one is really hard. And for me, it's important to also see what does it do with these blemishes? How does it do this selection around the shadows? Because this is where a lot of filters go wrong. So let's see how it works. Blemish removal, 100%. Nice. Let's do skin smoothing, 100%, and look at the shadow areas. Perfect. No problems. Perfect. It keeps everything in sync. Now, this part you have to do yourself. That's easy with the clone tool, of course, or with the healing brush. This one you have to do yourself. But hey, compared to before, nice. Great. Okay, now with the eyes, you have a lot of options. You can do the original iris, you can do an iris flare, and because this one is from the side, I can't show you that, so I'm very sorry for that, but cancel. Okay, so let's go for something else. Let's say we want to create something that's not there. We want to create something that's a little bit more funky, more nicer. So let's go for our final shot. And that's this one. Nice. Let's open that up in our Aperty. There we go. Now in this case, we don't need a lot of stuff in the skin. And by the way, I wish I would have selected one image from the front so I could show you the eyes, and that's totally my mistake. Sorry for that. So we're going to do a blemish removal. And we're going to do some skin smoothing for this one. Very nice. Okay, but now let's say you want to be creative. And of course, my lighting is nice in this one, but let's say I want something more. I want something more interesting. When you go here, we have some special options. Now, the first one you will see here is, of course, you can change everything about your model. So you can do a face slim, which I highly recommend not doing, because yeah, you change your model. You can change the shape of the eyes, eyebrow, nose. I don't know if this one is good enough for the nose. No, probably not, because it's from the side. Well, actually, yes. Do you see it works? There we go. If we zoom in, it actually does work from the side. That's nice. Cool. You can do the mouth, the lip position. Let's see if that also works from the side. Yes, look at that. So you can move the lips up and down. In all honesty, this is the part where I go like, no, this is too much. You should do this on location. So this is also why I just go through it very fast. If you need stuff like this, start coaching your model better. And if you need it a little bit, okay, that's fine. But you have a lot of people now showing images online where they shoot somebody that looks really sad and they end up with somebody happy from the other side of the face. No, that's 2 bridges too far, so don't. But in this case, if you, for example, need your eye shape, no. But if you need, for example, a very slight position of the lips, because, well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. It's not totally my thing. Body shape, same thing. You can change the body shape, even in the dark. Look at this. Now, again, not my thing. So I'm going to leave it for this. If you like it, great. What I want to show you guys is the creative part. And this is light control. This is awesome. Let's first do the other ones. Okay, so you can do portrait bouquet. And you can literally just make the background blurry. In this case, of course, we're shooting straight against the backdrop. So let's see what works. You see, it just pops out your model. It's nice. This is one of the things that I have a little bit of a problem with, much less than changing the whole look of somebody. If you want to have a little bit more bouquet, for example, outside, be my guest. It's possible now, so just make it look natural. And you can do a lot with your background too. We have LUTs. That's awesome. So you can give a nice look to your images, same as you're used to, for example, with Luminar, Neo. There are a little bit less of those LUTs, but you can always get more or create your own. So that's nice. We have film grain, vignetting, and high key. High key, nice, but not for an image like this, as you can see here. Maybe a little bit. Okay, the one that I wanted to show you, and that's the one that I really like. And again, I'm not going to use this in my work, but I saw it and I was going like, I know a lot of you guys are going to love this. This is light. This is great. So show on canvas. This is my first light source. So let's say I'm going to place my light source here, but I want more amount. There we go. And now let's change the hue to blue. And of course, give it a lot of saturation. There we go. Now I can move my light literally around. Oh, sorry. Let's remove that one. I can literally move my light around my model now. This is great, right? So let's say I want to do it from here. Now this is just light, and you can keep adding light. So let's do another one. Let's do that one from here, and let's make it full power, and let's make it red with a lot of saturation, and let's do a lot of depth. And the cool thing is, look at this, look at the shadow lines. If you move, this is cool, right? It's not perfect, of course, because it's a two-dimensional image, but look at what it can do. Okay, let's say I don't want it here. Look at the arm shadow. It tries to recreate that with the hand. It's scary. This is really scary. Okay, cool. Now comes the fun part. When I saw this, I wasn't that blown away. I was like, oh, okay, it's cool, nice. I've seen this before, but it's cool. That's when I found this little switch, light customization. This is so cool. Look at this. Now we can go, for example, your scale down, and we can do it also for red. You can do it separately for all your colors. This is so cool for creative parts. So let's do our scale. Let's do this one small, and let's go for dots. So we have red dots on our model. Yes. You can move the light source with the dots around. And there we go. And let's go for the blue one, and let's go for stripes, for example. Strips, it already is on strips. There we go. Move it around. Nice. Isn't that cool? So now you can create different lighting effects. Now, if you go like, hey, that's nice, I'm going to show you something that will really blow your mind. So with Luminar Aperty, I highly recommend it for skin work because that's great. And if you don't have anything else, it's also great for tinting and it's great for everything else like structure. You can change the body of your model, you can change the eyes. But if you really want to go all out, and this is what I use all the time for tinting my images, but also for my cosplay images. With cosplay, I have a very simple rule. Everything goes. With my normal work, if you see a lens flare in my fashion work or portrait work, in 99.9% of the cases, that lens flare is 100% real. Sometimes I have 3 shots. 1 with a perfect lens flare and 2 where the lens flare is there, but it isn't perfect, but the expression is perfect, the pose is perfect. At that point, I have no problem with changing my lens flare. So in the old days, you would just combine 2 images, take the lens flare from one and just aim it at the other one. Now, why don't I have any problems with adding lens flares in an image like that? Very simple. Everything is already there. You see the light hitting your model, going over your model, the color is there. So it's very easy to just place a light source somewhere and just create something that looks 100% believable because, in essence, the light source was there. But what if you don't have your light source there and you just want to create something funky or you want to create the perfect look for your images? This is my absolutely favorite plugin in the world, Borisifix and then Optics. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Luminar. I'm a Luminar ambassador for many, many years, and I highly recommend Luminar, also supporting Luminar. It's a great company. But if you go like, what is the filter that blew you away, literally? That's Borisifix. Now, Borisifix is very, very extensive, so I can't show you 1%, but I'm just going to show you what I use. Let's say we have an image like this and I want to freak out. I want to make it much more interesting. The first thing I will do is light. So as you can already see, we have so many options. We have ambient light, and then over here you have very much different options, which on the right side you can change. You can change the opacity. It's insane. You can do a masking, atmospheric glows. It's insane, literally. So let's start. Let's start adding a lens flare. Now, because my light was coming from that side, I want to make sure that my lens flare is also from that side. So I'm going to place it out of the frame, aimed towards my model. You can change the direction of the lens flare. But when I look at this image, I go like, yeah, but this looks so fake. So let's go for our hotspot and then the outer brightness. There we go. Much better. So now it already looks believable because my light was actually there, that there's a lens flare there, right? Doesn't look weird. But what if I want my lens flare to look nicer? Well, they have all these different options. Look at this. And do remember that I turned the outer brightness off. And that goes for all the lens flares I'm going to add. So let's turn that on so you can see the difference between those lens flares. This is so cool. I always find something that's interesting, like for example this one. And again, I told you guys, I'm going all over. Nice. Gives me a nice look in the image. Okay, let's go further. Let's find one and then I'm going to continue. Let's take this one. Okay, let's do the hotspot brightness. Nice. There we go. Now, of course, you can also change the size of your hotspot. So you can move it around. As mentioned before, you can change the direction of your outer brightness, which I now turned off. So let's turn it on again. You see here, you can move it around. It's insane. This is so cool. I keep playing with this, sorry. So let's turn the outer brightness down and let's keep the hotspot nice. Okay, so now let's say that I like this image. I go like, yeah, this is okay. This is what I want, but I want something else. Now I can always add another layer. And for example, I can do a lighting setup like this, where I go like, okay, I want windows, or maybe something like this or this. As you can already hear in my voice, this is not what I'm going to do. Orbs, these are nice. Oh, this is cool. Look at this effect. And then just tone it down. Really nice for creative work. As you can see here, just going through these images already gives me so many options and so many ideas like, oh, this is cool, I'm going to use this. But what I'm really want to show you guys is this is the stuff that I do with my cosplay. So I add a lot of materials. You can do fog, you can do smoke, rain, whatever. But what I use all the time, every single image, is film effects, and mostly film stock. Now you can start with default. This is normal image. Now when I go for film stocks, this is what normal film looks like. So for example, an 8mm black and white, 500 Days of Summer, 8mm color, Agfa, About Time. So they have different names. Some really translate back to what you would expect from a movie, or sorry, from a film roll. And I've shot with some of those films, and they are indeed looking pretty much what I expect. And not that I'm an expert, but I just recognize some stuff. And this is the film stocks. This is nice. It becomes interesting when you go to looks. In looks, they already created looks for you. For example, where they combine a little bit of distortion, black and white, some color, some maybe overexposing areas. And this is where you can just go through with your images and just look what you like. And if you see something like this, you go, wow, this is awesome, but it's too much of this, too much of that. First thing I always do is just lower the opacity to 0 and then build it up to hero until I like what I see. There we go. And in this case, of course, I'm going overboard. One of the other things that I like, especially for outside images, is the vintage color strip. It always gives me that little bit of vibe from Technicolor. Of course, this one is over the top. Let's go for the 2-strip, for example. As you can see here, really, really nice stuff. And again, you can change whatever you want to your heart's content over here. If you don't like the red filter, well, you just change it to a blue filter and you're done. If you don't like the green, well, change it to, for example, red and you're done. It's limitless, it's endless. It will drive you insane within a few weeks. Film effect, also very cool. You can create something with more shadows, very good year, after the rain. These are all some of my favorites, which that one of course not. And film damage. Now these normally you stack. So let's say I choose a film stock, which I like, for example, the, let's go for 8mm color. Let's turn that down just a little bit, there we go. Add a new layer, and on top of that layer, you can, for example, do grain or film damage. And film damage is really nice if you want to create something like an old, like those movies, those 8mm horror movies from the past. They have a perfect setup for that. Let me see where it is. Here we go. With those heavy scratches, you can change whatever you want in those scratches. You can do the stains. So let's do more stains. Let's do a lot more dust. And let's do some scratches, which we change around. We do some vignetting, which takes away my lens flare, so I'm not going to do that. And of course with seeds, you can literally just play a movie and just select the frame that you like. There we go, this is nice. You can mask, it's insane. There's so much here. And again, for the cosplay shots, I love using this software. And for the normal fashion, what I do and portraiture is I'm literally using film looks. So I'm doing my skin work in Aperty at the moment, and then I dive straight into Boris FX just for the film look. So the image comes in, film look, done. And the nice thing about Boris is, as soon as I press apply, it will literally just handle this. Now, in Photoshop, you have this thing that works with Aperty, by the way. If you go into your filters and you go here, you see optics and Aperty. So if I run Aperty now, it will literally run Aperty, do everything that I did last time, and I'm done. If you do Boris, it doesn't work that way. But there's a workaround, and I want to show you that. Just open up optics again, and it will give you a pop-up. Do you want previous filters? Yes. And now it will add up those filters again. So if you're working in several images, so for example, I did a photo shoot and I have 4 images from set 1, I have 6 images from set 2, I do one image 100% in Aperty and Boris FX, then I open up my second image, then I go to filters and I run Aperty automatically, then I dive into Boris FX, just press yes, close, save. Do the same thing with the next image. So it works really fast and you get the same quality of image over and over again. Okay, for this is what I want to tell you guys. I'm going to close this down for now. And I'm going to grab my OBS and go for transition. There we go. Awesome. So let's see if we have any questions. No questions in the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We always check those daily. And for the next digital classroom, it's actually up to you. What are your lighting problems? The next digital classroom will be all about your lighting problems. So email us, leave comments on social media. I'm going to ask the question there too. What are your lighting problems? And we try to solve those problems in the next episode. I would like to thank BenQ with great monitors, of course, and sponsoring Digital Classroom. Rogue with the magnetic system, also for sponsoring Digital Classroom. And of course, IQ Wire and Cascable. Cascable you can find on the App Store. For Skylum software and Borders just drop me an email. We have some really nice discounts for that. And if you think like, hey, I not want to bug Frank for a discount, we also have a really nice discount page on our website called frankdoorhof.com/discounts. How creative. Aren't it awesome, right? So you can find it there. Another thing that I want to point out for you guys is actually the Patreon. We give a lot of information on Patreon with behind the scenes photos. When I do a photo shoot or a workshop, I upload all the images immediately into Patreon as soon as they're done. On normal social media, you will see them spread out over several weeks, or some images you don't see at all. We also do portfolio reviews on Patreon. We do a lot of stuff that is actually asking questions from our Patreons, and we try to answer them in the chat. And we recently even did a whole video with just images that they send in, and we do a whole retouch and explaining about lighting, composition, and whatnot more. The cool thing is Patreon starts at $1 a month. So with $1 a month, you support my work, and you get a lot of creative stuff and a lot of behind-the-scenes images. You can also go up in tier. I believe at $10 you can send in images each month and you will get a personalized video. And that video is often like 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes long. It is uploaded also to the Patreon website, or to the Patreon group, so everybody can see the video. And that's one of the added benefits. You also get to see what I do for other people. So it's a big learning process. It's very creative, and the people are very, very nice to each other. And that's in a polarized world something that's unique. Nobody is fitting on each other. They're all helpful, and there's no negativity. As soon as I see negativity, I will kick you out. So be warned. So I hope you join us on Patreon. Thank you so very much for watching, guys. I have nothing more. If there are no questions in the chat, no. So see you again for the next digital classroom. And that will be when, Annewiek?
March 12th.
March 12th. And that will be the one, what's your problem?